All right, so Mayor, one of the big things here in the last week since the inauguration has been more destruction in downtown, not necessarily associated with any protest, but what some people have called the Black Bloc or Antifa, or people that are just looking to create violence and destruction downtown. As mayor, I know the chief has come out and said a few things, but as mayor, what can you do to stop this kind of activity from continuing to occur?
I've spoken loudly against this activity since the beginning, and it is very different than protesting and First Amendment rights. This activity is a gathering for criminal purposes. They're committing vandalism. It happened downtown on Inauguration Day, but Capitol Hill's been dealing with it for a long time. I've talked to the businesses up there and working with community to really stand together against these actions. And I think we as a city have to be united in that. I've talked to the chief about what additional things the police department can do. We're working with communities so everyone speaks with one voice to really say that that kind of behavior is not acceptable.
Have you talked to the city attorney at all about enforcement? And there's a question on whether people are getting charged, if they're getting jailed, that perhaps that's allowing this activity to continue to occur.
So the restrictions that COVID has placed on the jails and both prosecuting attorneys' offices, the city attorney and the King County prosecuting attorney, are real limitations. And I think that they do have an impact because if you have to limit the number of people who can be held in a jail or other um, facility like that because of COVID and the danger that's been presented, then it limits the number of people that are arrested and held and charged. And so I think we've got to have some new approaches there. I think both Pete Holmes and Dan Satterberg have been trying to, throughout the year, figure out, what approaches we can have that we can ensure public safety and at the same time comply with some of the health requirements around COVID and how many people you can keep in a congregate setting. So there's no question about it that we have to do better on it. Police officers here have talked about, arresting the same person over and over again, which leads to additional resources that we're using that we shouldn't have to use. And it's creating a real burden on the businesses and residents.
Should police take a different approach to preventing that? Is there anything more that the city can do? Because again, to stress, especially what we saw on Wednesday into Thursday was not necessarily associated with any sort of peaceful protest or people that were protesting any sort of federal plan. These were people that were dressed in black that were just destroying property. So, I mean, should there be a different approach here?
The chief of police has been trying different approaches. We saw this kind of phases where for a period of time, some of the Black Bloc people were embedded in other protests that were for things like Black Lives Matter, but they have been doing their direct actions on Capitol Hill for months now, and the police department has tried different approaches, and it's had varying degrees of success. We have seen some of the more criminal activity decline somewhat. There's fewer fires that have been set. There's been less conflict, and less damages to the businesses, but it's still happening way too often. And I think on Inauguration Day, what we saw was the veil pulled back, that this really was not in support of First Amendment activity. It was just purely anti-government, and with the desire to create as much damage and havoc as possible. And so I've talked to the chief of police about what additional tactics we can do, and the police can use to make sure that they can stop people before the damage occurs. But that can be hard because it is very challenging for police when you have a large group of people who are instigating violence and who think nothing about fighting with police. In fact, it seems to be one of their goals. It is difficult for the police to engage in a way that will be safe for folks and can diminish the amount of harm that's done.
So it may be a tough question to answer, but it's been picked up on by people outside the Northwest. Why does this continue to happen? This kind of activity, this kind of destructive behavior, continue to happen in places like Seattle and Portland? versus
It's
other
happening in
parts?
other places too. I've talked to mayors across the country, and the anarchists have done similar things recently in Denver and Chicago and Los Angeles. So it is not, we get the attention that we got for that previously, but it's happening in other places. And I think that we have to have approaches that can make sure that people understand peaceful protesting is allowed and supported and good. Property destruction and just doing the kind of damage we saw is not. That is just illegal activity. And the police are trying as best they can to devise tactics to lessen the amount of conflict with those groups and prevent there to be the damage to property. But we also, we've seen in some of those confrontations that there can be large crowds that are black bloc crowds that are much more difficult for the police to intervene in.
So on a couple of other topics, I understand that your deputy mayor has kind of taken the lead on the convention center expansion, but there's more discussion today on that issue and the shortfalls with hotel motels and what that has meant to that project at large. From where you sit and with what you can say about that project, where do you think it goes from here?
So I'm recused from the decisions related to the convention center, but I'm very hopeful as a Seattle resident that we move forward. Coming out of COVID is going to be really hard. We've got some hard months ahead of us in COVID until we can get the vaccination in the amounts that we need. But then opening up our economy is going to be incredibly challenging. And I believe that the cities who do what they need to do now are going to have an advantage over the cities that don't. And building that kind of, readiness means we want to be the city people travel to. I think after COVID, we can see this period of time where everybody is going to have this pent up demand to go visit places. And there'll be this, I think the cities that are ready with convention centers and hotel rooms and tourism are going to have a real advantage to be the places that people want to visit first.
And the other thing I wanted to ask you about is it might have been the fastest moving piece of legislation through the council that you've already signaled your support for, and that has been the extra $4 an hour in hazard pay for grocery store employees. When do you expect to sign that? Why do you think it's a good idea?
I think it is really important to do this because quite literally, without our grocery store workers, we wouldn't have made it through COVID. And I think all of us who go to the grocery store try to limit our exposure. We try to get in there as quickly as we can and out. But whether it's food on the tables or other supplies we need, the grocery stores have been a literal lifeline for Seattle. And those grocery workers are in there for, day in, day out, hour after hour, serving everybody who walks through that door. Their risk and exposure is significant. And we need them to keep working. We need them to show up. And I think we've got to give them that kind of hazard pay to, number one, show the appreciation, but to make sure that we keep that in the coming months, because it has really literally been a lifeline for the city of Seattle.